guys, welcome back to Delving into the Cold. This is Dee. And I just want to say, wow, you guys really showed me some love on the Maura Murray episode last week, and it's greatly appreciated. I know that her case is a popular one, and I think it's great that people are still, putting it out there and, keeping interest going in the case, and I think that's fantastic. So today we're going to start a two-part episode. We'll do this part this week, and then next week will be the second half. And it's going to be all about Jack the Ripper. So that being said, let's just go ahead and get into it. From August to November, 1888 to, and then there was a little bit of speculation in 1891, but that's not confirmed. The 1888 murders definitely are confirmed to have been by Jack. This occurred in the Whitechapel area of London, England, and there were 5 confirmed victims, often referred to as the canonical 5, which were Mary Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly. And now I will say that during the time when this happened, there was a huge problem with newspapers trying to just sell newspapers and not reporting the facts, which there's still a lot of that today, but back then it was really, really rampant. So when Jack, started killing, it was big news. And unfortunately, a lot of the speculations or assumptions were inaccurate and scandalous, and people just ate it up. They fed on the media fed on people's curiosity like a cat on milk. I mean, it was ridiculous. And this was front page news for a while. And they did all this obviously to sell newspapers. And they did sell. Unfortunately, it was on the backs of the 5 victims. And so that is unfortunately how things go a lot. But that doesn't mean that we need to perpetuate those inaccurate details. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my best to give you as many accuracies and facts. And I think it's worth mentioning that Jack was the first known celebrity serial killer, quote unquote. And he even has spurred a new field of criminalistics known as ripperology. People have studied him and his kills for over 100 years, and there's been a lot of speculation, there's been a lot of finger pointing, but unfortunately, the case remains unsolved. So, I'm going to go into the victims in this episode. I'm going to tell you what happened to them, where it happened, things of that sort, and then the next episode we'll discuss suspects. And as I mentioned, there are speculations of other victims, but these 5 have been confirmed. Victim number 1, Mary Ann Nichols. She was born in 1845, and unfortunately there's not a lot known about her other than the fact that she was married at some point in her life and had 5 children. People suggested that she did have a drinking problem that she supported with a life of prostitution, but again, that could totally be just speculation. On the night of August 31st, 1888, Mary Ann left the bar to return to the boarding house she was staying in, but she didn't have enough money to spend the night. So she decided that she would return to the streets to try to find a quote-unquote John for the night so that she could pay her way in. Unfortunately, at 4 a.m. the next morning, her body was found in Buck's Row. She was partially undressed and had a slit throat and abdomen. She was 43 years old. And while it is confirmed that she occasionally resorted to prostitution, the alcoholism and other traits that people have attributed to her are unknown. Because again, these were times when people didn't care what was being said as long as something was being said. The second victim was Annie Chapman. And she was actually not born into poverty, or at least not to as much poverty as she was in during the time of her death. She was once married to a man that was fairly wealthy, and she had 2 children, and unfortunately one of those children died in infancy and the other was disabled. She separated from her husband and moved to Whitechapel, and in Whitechapel she worked as a prostitute to supplement the income that came from her alimony payments. So basically Annie was trying to get by however she could, and I think that's what you'll notice about all of these victims is that they were just trying to survive like everybody else. When her husband died, or when her ex-husband rather died, the money stopped and Annie spiraled out of control. And apparently people say that she had been having problems with alcohol before his death, and afterwards she kind of just spiraled into a deeper level of alcoholism. On the night of September 8th, 1888, Annie was out drinking and trying to make money to spend another night at the boarding house when she was attacked and ultimately killed and mutilated. So this is a theme that you're going to see with at least a few of these victims, is they were just trying to find somewhere to stay for the night, doing what they had to do to get off the street for the night. And she was found in the doorway of a private home the next morning. Her throat was slit, she was disemboweled, and her uterus and bladder were removed. Her intestines were also on the ground beside her. But, get this, her cause of death was asphyxiation. All the mutilation that occurred to Annie happened post-mortem, which is definitely interesting. So victim number 3 was Elizabeth Stride, who was born in Sweden and had immigrated to London in 1866. She had been a prostitute before she got married, and, that's about as much as we know. There's not a lot known about her, possibly because she was an immigrant, but other than that, that's really all we know until the night of her death. On the night of her death, she was seen kissing a man. Now, unfortunately, the man was never identified. She was found on September 30th, 1888, also with a slit throat. She was not mutilated like the other victims, which suggests that the attack may have been interrupted. Now, especially the Whitechapel area of London back in this time would have been busy at night with bars and with prostitution and illegal things that were going on there. So it's not a surprise that Jack could have been interrupted. I think it's a strong theory, and it could have been just her personality. He could have seen something in her that was different than the other victims. We don't know, but either way, she was not mutilated. The next victim was Catherine Eddowes. Catherine was never married. She did live with a man for 20 years, but she wasn't married. She had 3 children with this man, and people claim that she was an alcoholic, but most people claim that she was not a prostitute. On the night of her death, she was arrested for public intoxication, but she was released a few hours before her death. Now, later that night, A witness claims to have seen Catherine with a man. And when they found her body the next day, it was completely mutilated. Her throat was slit, her eyelids and a lot of her facial skin was removed, her kidneys were removed, and her intestines were cut open. So this was a brutal attack. And it could have been one of those things where he didn't get to finish the job with Elizabeth Stride, so he took that aggression out on Catherine Eddowes. The final victim is Mary Jane Kelly. She was known to be a beautiful, beautiful woman. She was an Irish native who had transplanted herself into London society. But she was a successful prostitute in a high-end brothel, so she wasn't quote-unquote working the streets. She had worked in a brothel. Unfortunately, that ended when she moved in with her partner and became an alcoholic. And it was this man who returned home to find Mary Jane dead on their bed. She was the one that was the most mutilated, and she was the only one whose death didn't occur on the street. It occurred in her home. Her breasts were removed, her arms were mutilated, her face was destroyed beyond recognition. He cut her from throat to thighs, and her organs were removed. So, Mary Jane suffered possibly more than any of the other victims. She just was absolutely brutalized. I didn't put any of the speculated victims here because they've never been confirmed to be Ripper victims. So these 5 that I've mentioned in this episode are the only confirmed victims. Like I said, next week we'll get into suspects, and there are quite a few suspects. I didn't realize how many there were until I started researching. But we'll get into that next week. I just want to say thank you again for all the attention you've been paying the podcast. It means a lot to me, and I try to find cases that I think are interesting, that I think you guys will think are interesting, and so I hope that I'm doing a good job with that. Alright guys, that's all that I've got for you today. Stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.